Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and hey, you can do this. And this. Because this is Airwindows Pear2. Now you may ask, what's that? Well, Pear was a early, this is like practically this year. I've been working really hard on a lot of stuff, so go figure. Pear is the form of equalizer that I built console MC and console LA out of. The idea was to have a kind of EQ that I could make into crossovers and then do forms of analog modeling for the EQ that use this different form of crossover that's not just your usual digital filters. Well, one thing I've been looking into recently is figuring out how I can use what I learned from capacitor 2, which is that technique of modulating the cutoff frequency based on the amount of voltage pressure against the imaginary capacitor in the middle of the thing. And we're doing that with Pear2. And you'll hear it like this. We've got a thing going on where if we take the nonlinearity out, we have our original Pear filter, including the ability to do multiple poles. The poles click a little bit because I'm switching different poles in and out. That's why it's doing that. So we could do a sort of weirdly resonant, but not resonant sound. But check this out. You can throw in the nonlinearity, or way too much nonlinearity. So this is a sound that you're not likely to get from anything else because it didn't exist until Pear2 started doing it. It's essentially an unusual Airwindows style filter with lots of poles to make it steeper and pseudo-resonant. And then we have the nonlinearity, which is just kind of freaking it out and making it act very differently. You can pull it back too. So sort of dial in the amount of grunge that you would like. And dial back the amount of steepness. Maybe a little less of the nonlinearity. And the idea is you dial these things in until you get the voicing of the simple filter that you might like. And check it out, we still have the inf wet. As with the other stuff, you can hear the nonlinearity more easily on really high frequency stuff. That's happening through the nonlinearity. I can shut it off. Or I can put lots of it in. Now that might not sound nice, but then we'll take the poles down a little bit smaller. Pull nonlinearity down a little bit more. In hopes of making something that sounds kind of like an analog filter, in this case a high pass. And the idea is I should be able to make things like future versions of console that mimic the sounds of real-world analog consoles using techniques like this. And then we can go back to the low pass. Now this, of course, is different from what I'm doing in the Stonefire plugin, which is a Kalman filter, not a normal filter, but this is also not a normal filter because what this is a variation on the Pear filter. So the guts of it are going to act more like a regular EQ, but it's still working on the basis of, if I remember correctly, some kind of slew clipping or slew soft saturation thing going on, which I believe came out of Creature. There's been a lot of stuff to do. And that is Pear2. So you can use Pear2 now without waiting for me to build it into other stuff. That said, the reason you've got it is because I put together, and anybody following my live streams has seen me doing this, I put together tools in order to make larger, more complicated things, and then let people have the tools as well, because there's multiple purposes for that. One of them is if you wanted to use only one layer of this filter that I might be using for a crossover. For instance, I might be using it with not so many poles so that it would be a relatively clean style of crossover rather than having weird artifacts in there or something. Then if I use that for a crossover, the neat thing about it is I can steepen it a little bit much and see if I can get a useful tonal color out of it. For instance, one thing that was happening with some of my previous work with Pear filter, even without the nonlinearity factor in it, was I was able to do cutoffs where you would have a bass boost, for instance, but because of the way that the cutoff was shaped and the fact that it was strictly a Pear filter rather than your, biquad or whatever, there was an interesting little side effect where you would be boosting a bass frequency and then cutting a low mid frequency a teeny little bit at the same time. You designed the cutoff of that particular crossover to do musically useful things, and I sort of voiced it along those lines with the hope that I'd have a accessible plugin where you'd be able to, have a bass, mid-range, and treble control. And you'd be able to boost, for instance, bass and have it voice in other ways so that it was a good sounding boost. And then because it's all made up out of crossovers, it doesn't matter how weird the crossover behavior is. If you set it to unity gain for everything, it goes back to flat. It goes back to no effect being caused at all. And that's kind of how I design some of these things. That said, I'm here to tell you that I've got a bunch of stuff in the works. I'm going to get out of here without taking 20 minutes over this video because I have a bunch more work to do. You know that I'm working on the juice plugins, yes? And what that means, it's not like orange juice or apple juice. It is a format for doing graphical user interfaces. But wait, you say, Chris, you hate graphical user interfaces. Not exactly. What I don't want is to be stuck with them. And I like the modular system of plugins where I put out a lot of little plugins that you can combine in the DAW, and none of them have distracting fake wooden interfaces and stuff like that. Which is not to say that I've never designed interfaces. Back in the day, I used to do a thing called mastering tools, which is where my metering stuff, and the meter plugin still exists. I have not got it out yet. I have not got the GitHub Actions stuff building it properly yet. But that is coming a little farther every time somebody comes to the live streams and helps me work through a section of the problem, because I'm attempting to do something that is too big for me, that I don't know how to do. Other people know how to do that, but other people did not make the meter plugin, and so I had to. And that's kind of how this stuff works. So, working on being able to put out first that meter plugin, not just as something that I've been able to build a instance of for my own use, but to let everybody else have it. At which point, the GitHub project exists and other people can also build their version of the meter plugin because it's all open source code. In this case, since it is being made into a VST3, it's GPL'd. Because GPL is the way that I can build a VST3 without signing away my right to build VST2s, which is always going to be something that I will also do. Because I support retro machines and the usefulness of having like some old computer that you make music on. There's a lot of worthwhile stuff to do along those lines. And along those lines, you might expect a lot of interesting surprises coming up before too terribly long. Today, it is Pear2. And I'm going to let you have Pear2, but not to overlook the fact that I'm doing all this work in the Juice framework, and week by week, I'm getting more happening with that. And remember that discontinuity plugin, which is about making stuff accurately mimic the sound of air being distorted? And this is why you can't just go into a DAW, some stuff in a DAW, and have it sound like real life. But I think I can get stuff to sound like real life. And I have some interesting things in store, let me just say. And I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.